On episode 184 of the Peak Performance of Leadership podcast, we speak to story expert Gabrielle Dolan, and she's going to tell you how you can tell a story that will keep your audience's attention. That's right, folks. It's all about creating magnetic stories today. Are you ready for this? All right, let's do it. Welcome one, welcome all to the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast, a weekly podcast series dedicated to helping you hit peak performance across the three domains of leadership. Those being leading yourself, leading your team, and leading your organization. This podcast couples my 20 years of military experience as a senior Canadian Army officer with world-class guests to bring you the most complete podcast of leadership going. And for more, feel free to check out our website at movingforwardleadership.com. And with that, let's get to the show. Yes, thanks for coming out. It is your Chief Leadership Officer, Scott McCarthy. It's so great to have you here for another episode of the show, The Big Show, and that is our weekly interview show. All right, today we're going to be talking about storytelling, and if you have listened to the podcast for any amount of time, you will note I'm actually not a fan of storytelling. Ooh, newsflash, not a huge fan, and we'll get into that basically right at the beginning of the episode with Gal today. But before we dive into talking about storytelling and creating magnetic stories, I do have an announcement for you, the listener, and that is I'm getting ready to launch something amazing, something great, and something that's been asked for, and that is the Leader Growth Mastermind. That's right. We are going to launch an online mastermind for you leaders out there to help you lead to your fullest potential. So if you feel like you're not getting the guidance that you need at work, if you feel like you're struggling, or you just need a group of like-minded people to help you basically get things off your chest, bounce ideas off of, have it whatever you want, this is going to be it for you. It's going to first iteration. We're going to look at launching this in October, so you want to jump at it because space will be limited. We're only going to have a handful of seats for this first iteration of the mastermind. So you can check this out at movingforwardleadership.com/leader-growth. Again, that's leader-growth. And there you'll be able to sign up for a specific newsletter just to that mastermind. And in the end, I'll let you know when I'm ready to take live people to sign up. Live registration. That's what I was looking for. I'm going to leave that in case you get a chuckle, because yes, we need live people, Scott. Come on. Let's keep it light. Let's have some fun. All right, let's talk about today's episode. Rao, or Gabrielle Dolan, she goes by Rao, by the way. She's a highly sought-off speaker. She's worked with thousands of high-profile leaders from around the world, 50 companies, multinational to small companies, all around the world, in helping them, leaders, be able to communicate more effectively. And Rao looks at storytelling, not just for the sake of telling stories, but rather a form of communication. And this is what we get into during this episode. We talk about why stories are important, when they're best to be used, how to decide which stories to use, the winning formula for creating great stories. That's something you definitely want to listen to, as well as how to get comfortable with storytelling if you're not comfortable, and the added benefits of sharing personal stories. And you know, we often share stories on the show. I share stories all the time with my guests on the show, with you, the listener. So as a leader, yes, it's important Do I believe it's the end all be all? No, I will tell you I don't. But I think Raoul actually has a great balanced view on it. And you're going to see at the beginning, we actually agree about my viewpoint on storytelling, which is very interesting. Although she, of course, has her spin. So that's the intro. That's enough from me. Why don't you sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation with Gabrielle Dolan on how you can create magnetic stories. Gabrielle, or do I call you Raoul? I saw it on your web. Raoul?
Yeah, you can call me Raoul. Call me Raoul.
Welcome to the show, Raoul. So good to have you here today.
Thanks, Scott. Really looking forward to our chat.
So we're going to be talking about your book, Magnetic Stories. Thank you for a copy. Hold it up right here for you to prove that I have it. I actually did go through it. So I'm going to go hard. I'm going to go fast out of the gate with the first question of this interview. And I'm going to confess I am not a lover of story time.
Why? What's happened to you in your past?
Yeah. Hold on, let me call my therapist. No, I feel there is a need for stories. There's a certain place for stories. What I find right now going on in the space is that stories are getting a lot of amped upness and hyped upness. Like, oh, you have to tell a story. You have to tell a story. You have to tell a story. Well, you know what? Sometimes the people don't need story. They need just direction and guidance, and that is about it. That being said, like I said, I do find sometimes there's a need for and a place for them, but you're definitely not going to find this cat writing a book about stories. So out there.
So can I just say that's a really, I'm glad you started that, because I think one of the misperceptions, especially now, stories getting really popular. You see people, got to tell a story, you got to do this, it's got to be this big story. And I look at it and go, first of all, it's not even a story. And it's not an appropriate story to tell. So I am absolutely with you. You don't need a story for everything.
All right. That did not go the way I was expecting. But thank you. So, but why are they important though? And I guess the follow on to that is when are they appropriate to be used so that leaders use but don't abuse stories?
Oh, I like that. Can I steal that? Use but don't abuse.
Okay. I'll hit pause. Do you want to know where that came from? So when I was
sure. Yeah, I feel like you're going to tell me a story. So let's go for it.
Yeah, I'm going to tell you exactly a story. So when I was growing up in a very small town of Newfoundland, which is on the east coast of Canada, our local swimming hole, there would have been what we call a cabin, or you guys might call a cottage there. And the guy had built basically a dam and turned it into a swimming hole of a little small brook. And he had a sign there that said, use, but don't abuse. So all the local kids were allowed to go and swim there, but of course, don't abuse it. So that's where since I was like 6 years old.
So there you go.
There was a story to kick off.
There's a story behind the meaning. And to me, what I get from that, what he was trying to say is use it, but respect it. Exactly. And I think we could apply exactly the same with story. So use it and respect it. So don't use story to manipulate, use it to influence, which I think is coming to you. Was that your question? Like, when would you use it and when would you not use it?
Yeah, exactly. When should leaders be looking to, use a story to amplify their points or when should they not be using as well?
Yeah. So to me, what a story does, a story helps your audience understand your message better, and it helps them connect to it in a way that influences an outcome. So they connect with it, they remember it, they engage with it. And ultimately, sometimes we're trying to influence people as we're trying to get them to do something different or feel something different or actually think something different. So when you don't need a story, if you're just doing a project status update, you don't need a story for that because you're just reporting on information. If someone asks you what the latest monthly sales figure is, you don't need, oh, that reminds me of a time when. You don't need a story for that. So to me, storytelling is something you use quite strategically. So when would you use it? If you're giving a presentation on, say, innovation, I would start with a story about what innovation means. So you've set the thing up. If you're rolling out new values, like I truly believe that you can't roll out company values or your own values without stories. If you're trying to get people connected, engaged with your strategy, again, you're going to need stories. So, but you don't need them for everything, but you do need them when you're trying to influence people or get people really connected and engaged with what you're saying.
Awesome. So from what I'm hearing is basically those strategic level types of activities where you're trying to be more influential, vice directive, right? So you're trying to inspire, you're trying to motivate, you're trying to create change or foster, ideas and the likes of those type of activity, vice, more of the managerial side to leadership, i.e. giving direction, reporting, crunching out a project or whatever. That be fair?
Yeah, it'd be fair. So if you're just trying to inform people, like just pass on information, you probably don't need story. But if you, like you said, if you're trying to influence them and inspire them and motivate them and engage them, then yeah, you need a story for that.
Awesome. So leaders out there are listening to this, like, okay, great. But, it's like, okay, I got to, especially for me right now. So right now, as we discussed before we record, by day, I'm a senior Canadian Army officer. And we have two big things going on right now. We're talking about culture change and we're talking about innovation at work. Hello, right up your alley, I would think, when it comes to storytelling, right? So as I'm trying to motivate, inspire, and basically foster my people now to think about these ideas and think about the future, think about how we can do things differently and better, what kind of story should I be looking to tell here to incite these different emotions out there to them?
Yeah. So one of the things that a lot of companies do this, they talk about culture change. And I would say to you, Scott, what does that mean to you? Like, I'm assuming culture change is, I'm assuming we need to follow these values and behaviors. Like, this is the way we need to do things now, as opposed to the way we've done things. Is that what it means? Is it all culture around your values and behaviors?
Yeah, that would be fair. That's fair for a quick one.
Yeah. So I think companies are really good at saying, okay, this is our purpose and these are our values, and we're going to drive culture change around this. But I would look at each one of those values. So, whether you've got 3 or 4 or 5 values, to say leaders need personal stories about what that means to them. So, you might have a value, say integrity might be one of your values. What I find when I come in and train leaders, I go, okay, so you need a personal story around integrity. They go, all right. I go, so let me ask you a question. What does integrity mean to you? And they'll go, it means telling the truth. Okay, what else does it mean to you? It means, I don't know, you've put me on the spot here. I haven't really thought about it this much before. So the first thing is, we haven't even given our leaders the space to go, what does it actually mean to you? And then once we find out what it means to them, then I take them through the process of how to find a personal story to communicate that message. I'll give you an example, because I think when you're talking about the power of story, there's no other better way to talk about the power of it than give you an example. So let's say, for example, you've had a culture which was a win at all cost culture. So that was the culture, but you want to change. We're trying to change our culture where it's not win at all cost. Yes, winning's important, but doing the right thing is also important to us. So let's just say we're looking for a culture change, and that's one of the aspects we want to do. So we might have a value around integrity, or we might have a value called doing the right thing, or, we could wordsmith it all it likes, but that's what it means to you. I've had an example of this where a leader, so I'd go, okay, so as leaders, as CEO, as senior leaders, you need to be sharing personal stories around what that means around that culture of it's not win at all costs, it's doing the right thing. So let me give you an example of a story that one leader shared around this value of doing the right thing. She said, in the early 60s, my dad was a professional swimmer, and he reached the point in his career that he actually tried out for the national swim squad. And on the day of the meet, he was apparently winning his race, and he got to the end to do the tumble turn, but he slightly misjudged the wall. Now, this was in the early 60s, so it was way before technology and sensors, and they had judges at the end, but with all that kicking and splashing, he knew that they wouldn't know whether he touched the wall or not. So he had to make a split-second decision. Does he just keep on swimming, or does he go back and touch the wall? And he decided to go back and touch the wall. Now, you don't really recover from that, and he didn't. And he never, ever made the national swim squad. And I would always ask my dad, do you regret going back to touch the wall? And he said, I've never regretted that, because if I didn't go back and touch the wall, it would only be, I'd have to spend the rest of my life knowing I did the wrong thing. And I'm sharing this with you because it reminds me of our value integrity. It's only a matter of time before we'll go back. We will have our own go back and touch the wall moments. And I invite you to consider what my dad would do. Now, that's a real life example of a leader sharing a story about her dad. But what does that story do for you? Does it brings the value to life, doesn't it? And it sort of does creates what the message she's getting across of, yes, it's important to win, but it's not win at all cost. It's not doing the wrong thing. And it's only through that story that it sort of brings that value to life.
Yeah, I definitely can see that for sure. Like, you do get a little tug at the old heartstrings there when someone's talking about their father, and and you can only imagine, you can almost imagine. Oh, you can't imagine, I should say, him at that level, right? That high competitive level of where it's literally splitting hairs for pretty much for time, even at that age, right? That time frame. So, doing the right thing mattered more than getting the win. So, no, I can definitely see how that would relate to emphasizing the need, and the importance of integrity, and that that's a very high value in the Canadian Army. For soldiers that don't have integrity, things start going sideways, and we've been down that path before.
So. And Anne, the woman that shared that, her name is Anne, and she said that every time someone comes and works for her, she shares that story. Like, it's part of her induction process, I guess, for want of a better word. Every time she changes a new job or new company, she shares that story because it's her leadership value. And she will say that they come to a decision, they need to make a decision, whether it's A or B, and she said people might start going down, well, technically we don't have to do A, legally we're not obliged to do A, and someone will always say, this is our go back and touch the wall moment, what's the right thing to do? And guess what? Everyone goes, well, B is clearly the right thing to do. And she'll go, well, clearly that's what we'll do. So when you talk about culture change, you're talking about values in action, like actually people making decisions based on the values. And without sharing stories, those values, they just remain words on a wall or words on a paper, and people aren't making decisions based on them.
No, that makes a lot of sense, and I like that last part, and that it's got to be a part of your DNA of an organization. If you just tell the story and move on, then it basically becomes a lot like a lot of those companies that have, oh, here are values, and they're just kind of painted on the wall, and everyone walks by them and not even barely looks at them, but don't reflect on them or anything. So I guess this is another great way of, making those words that are just there come alive and actually mean a bit more.
Yeah. So, and to me, it's also, you've also got to do it. I mean, clearly, and Anne has to be, if she's sharing a story like that, she's got to be doing the right thing all the time. So to me, culture change happens when you actually do it. You actually live the values, but also the stories you share about the values. So to me, you've got to have both things happening at the same time.
Absolutely. Now, is there like a formula for the leaders out there when they're thinking, okay, I have a story, it fits this, maybe I'm trying to relate it to a value of my company, like you use, but now is like, okay, it's like so long, there's so many different parts to it, so is there a formula that leaders out there can use to go, okay, I need this piece, that piece, and another piece to make a great story that's going to stick with my people, relate to the point that I'm trying to make, and basically live longer than the 30 seconds it's going to take me to tell it.
And look, there is a formula. There is a very, very big difference between sharing stories with our friends over dinner and sharing stories in work. Like a massive difference. And I know I might be biased because this is what I do, but I think if you don't teach your leaders how to do that, you're setting them up for failure as opposed to setting them up for success. So why don't I give you a few quick tips? The first is I take people through this process of beginning, middle, and end. Now, I know it might seem obvious, but there's a lot of people out there that tell stories without an ending, and you don't want to be that person. You don't want to be that person that tells a story without an ending. So a couple of tips is...
What is that?
I know, it's like even when people tell a story and then they just go on and you sort of go, like, where was that going? What was it about? They just
kind of slowly fade away and stop talking?
Yeah, they do slowly fade away. It's like teenagers where they slowly fade away and then go, and yeah. It's like...
give me 7 years. I got a 6-year-old and a 2-year-old, soon to be 3-year-old. So I'm a little ways away from those days.
They'll be talking and then they go, and yeah. But yeah, we want an ending. So a couple of things. First of all, your stories need to be succinct. So you said 30 seconds. I think we can go a little bit longer than that, but I think you need to be sharing your stories well under 2 minutes. So to me, about 1 to 2 minutes is a bit of a sweet spot, because if your audience is starting to think, get to the point, you're losing them. So you want to be finished your story well before that. And I think one of the misconceptions of storytelling, where people go, story, like I hate story time, is we've all come across people that just go on and on and on with their stories and they're not engaging. And I think the other way is how you start your story. So you don't want to be starting your story with, let me tell you a story, because sort of people go, oh, please don't, just tell me the point. So things like time and place, like, like the story I shared of Anne, in the early 60s, my dad was a professional swimmer. So it's like, okay, we're into the story. I'm one of 8 children. We're into the story. 3 years ago, I went camping. So like starting your story really effectively, determining what you put in and out. So deciding what detail goes in and what detail goes out is really important. And how you end it, how you end the story is critical. You don't want to be ending with the moral of the story is. So to me, a story is a really respectful way to communicate. And you need to allow people to get the message, not for you to tell them what the message is. So, for example, the story I just shared about Anne and her dad, she ended the story with, I invite you to consider what my dad would do. Can you see how she's not saying, so the moral of the story is, I expect you to do the right thing all the time. It'd be like, don't tell me what to do.
Awesome. So 1 to 2 minutes in length, start naturally.
Yep.
Right. Kind of as the swimming hole story kind of
yep.
went. Basically keep it tied to the purpose, and actually have an ending, and then finally have that ending so that it allows the person for reflection, vice direction is what I'm hearing from you, right?
I'm liking your little logos here, Scott. Reflection. Use, don't abuse. Have you got like a rhyming dictionary there?
That might have been one or two. This might be my first or second podcast interview that I've done. We're at 183rd, but
or it's all those marching songs that you've made up in. We are happy, we are merry. We've got a rhyming dictionary.
I just find that those sayings kind of just, it helps get those points ahead, right? Like use, but don't abuse, and reflection, not direction. I'm sure I got 50 million in the back of my head. I just can't pull them out right now.
So, but the cool thing, the use, but don't abuse, I will remember that more because you told me the backstory.
Right.
And the backstory gives it meaning, gives it a lot more meaning than just the slogan, I guess.
Right. Awesome. So we got the winning formula. So let's backtrack here. You told me why they're important, and and you somewhat agreed with me that they're not the end all be all, but they need to be, right time and place, just like anything else. We talked about when they're best used, how to pick a good one. We talked about the formula. Now, the leader who's listening there, and I come from a part of the country where we love to talk. So storytelling, as you can tell, is not a big deal to me. We'll be talking. I'm Gabby McGab with anybody, and I'm that type of personality too, very outgoing, and love meeting new people and learning people and talking to people and learning how they're doing. But of course, there's a lot of introverts that are listening to the show, who are not that. But at the same time, they're in these leadership roles, and they're like, I need to, make better connections with my people. I need to, drive these things like values and ideas home harder to my people. They're not getting it. I know I need to add stories to it. I'm just not a good storyteller. What do you say to those people out there to get them going?
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, when people say I'm not a good storyteller, part of me goes, as humans, you naturally tell stories, but I get some might be better at it than others. And we often go to that extrovert introvert because we sometimes see the extroverts, holding the floor, telling the stories. But what I find, ironically, is the introverts sometimes come up with, not sometimes, often come up with the better stories, because what's involved in being really good at storytelling in business is a lot of thinking about what's your clear message. So what's your one single message? What does that mean to me personally? So thinking about that, and then going through the process of where could I find a personal story. So I talk about the personal story. So Anne's story about her dad is what I would consider a personal story, as in it's got nothing to do with work. Now, the default is we're going to use a lot of work stories, and they're still fine. But I would say, think about what are the messages you need to communicate. And again, like we said before, you don't need a story for everything. But if you're always trying to give a message around innovation, for example, and people don't quite get it, well, then go, oh, maybe a story would help them get it. So be really clear on what innovation means to you, and then go through this process of do I have a personal story that would work for that? It could be something growing up. It could be something about your parents, or it could be a teacher that did something to you, or it could be something your kids have done. Don't dismiss. And the problem people go is, oh, I've got a story, but it doesn't seem big enough for innovation. And the reality is it will be big enough. Those sort of day-to-day stories that you don't think are big enough or important enough are the ones that people really connect and engage with. So you sort of got to go through this process of being clear on the message, thinking of all the potential stories you could have, and then sort of matching them. I am a massive fan of storytelling, but I'm also a massive fan of Excel spreadsheets. I love spreadsheets. So to me, it's literally sort of going, okay, you've got a growing list of messages you need to deliver. What are the potential stories? And you could almost do a spreadsheet to sort of match them to go, I'm going to do that story. If you don't like spreadsheets, just think of it as a couple of lists and matching them together.
I love Excel, but I hate the abuse of Excel. But that's a story for another day.
Use, don't abuse.
Use, but don't abuse. No, we have a very big culture problem in the armed forces where we use Excel for everything. And as an innovative type guy, it drives me nuts because that information effectively is useless. But that's not about storytelling. But that I like, depending on how it's used, it could be used very, very effectively. I'm sure you got a great Excel
you seriously could just write a journal, or a notebook. So I have a notebook. The idea is to be clear on your message, and then have these stories you could use. Because, Scott, normally in business, what happens is we go, okay, I need to communicate a message. I need to communicate a value. Or I need to communicate innovation, or I need to communicate diversity, inclusion, or whatever it is. And then we try to find a story. But once you get really good at this, and I find this after I've run my training workshops, people's sort of storytelling radar go up, and that something will happen to them, and they will just go, how could I use this? So how could I use this as a story? So once you've realized the power of story, life will go on as usual with you, and you will start to spot stories everywhere. So let me give you another example. We can't do this podcast without sharing lots of stories. Let me give you an example of this. Last year during winter, it was about this time last year because it's winter here, is my eldest daughter, Alex, she's 19, and she got me onto wine drops. Now, I don't know if you've had these before, but the idea is you put 5 drops of wine drops into your wine, normally red wine, and it's meant to reduce the effects preservatives have on you the next day. So pretty much just reduce any form of hangover.
What kind of wine are you guys drinking down there?
Well, maybe it's just how much we're drinking. We're drinking good Australian wine. That's what we're drinking. So anyway, Friday night, it was winter, it was cold, put the fire on, opened a bottle of Shiraz, put my 5 drops of wine drops in the bottle, poured myself a glass and Alex a glass. And Alex went to refill our glasses a bit later, and she's standing in the kitchen holding up the wine drops going, Mum, you didn't put this in the wine, did you? And I went, yes, why? And she goes, these aren't wine drops. These are eye drops. It's just like she's going, you've probably poisoned us. And anyway, so my first reaction was, who was the idiot that left eye drops right next to the red wine bottle? That was my first reaction. Blame someone else. But my second reaction was, how could I use this? Like this is a fun little story. How could I use it? So what message could I take? And then I think that could be a really good story around assumptions, how we make assumptions all the time. Like I just assumed that the bottle was wine drops. I didn't even read the label. Mind you, if I had read the label, the eye drop said blink, relief in every blink. And I probably would have just read that as drink, relief in every drink. But so what I do is I've got like a little journal, a little, notebook, and I just write eye drops / wine drops equals assumptions. And now if I ever need to give, a message around the importance of not making assumptions, perhaps I could share that little funny story to get the message across better.
Oh, absolutely. And I can almost see you running for your notebook or maybe your computer to go on Excel and just typing that in right away. Because, I think one of the biggest issues is that we're like, oh, that's a great story. I could use that sometime.
Yeah. And then we don't do it.
But then we don't take note of it.
And,
and then we forget about it.
And if you really, seriously, even if you don't want to write it down, just take a photo. That's the one thing I do a lot is I just take a photo. So I literally had the wine drops and eye drops bottles next to each other and I took a photo. So that's a reminder. When I travel a lot, I will see something and I'll take a photo because I think, I want it to be a memory of what I could do. So just find a way to remember it and capture it, I guess. So you don't forget it. And the cool thing with taking a photo, if you were ever doing a presentation, for example, you could actually have the photo, your own photo, and have that as on your PowerPoint. So that's the cool thing too with taking a photo.
Look at all the little, actionable nuggets being dropped right now. The photos, taking the notes, have an Excel spreadsheet. Now, but seriously, so to recap, to become more comfortable overall, that's how this section of the conversation started, was essentially, understanding and accepting that we all are storytellers. We all have it in us to be storytellers, and really being intentional about looking and realizing that every moment that we're essentially living can be used as a story that can be used, right? It can be used for the betterment of people. Like I can go ahead tomorrow and walk into work and I could tell a story about recording a podcast about storytelling and, and its importance and all this stuff. And some lady named Ralph from down under convinced me storytelling is actually, somewhat important.
And the reason I share that, one of the reasons I share that eye drop story too, Scott, is because a lot of people go, but I don't have any stories. Like, nothing major's happened to me. And it was like, don't worry about the major stuff. It's these little things that happen to you every day. It's just a case of saying, could I use that? And if you share that story and it helps your people, whether it's your team or your customers or what, if it helps them understand the message better, then why wouldn't you do it?
So I'm going to go even further and say these stories, the story of the eye drops is a fantastic story from a leadership perspective. And this is the types of stories that, us as leaders should be striving to tell. We should actually avoid as much as possible the work ones, although they do have a time and place. But these ones here really show who you are. So now, I know you like wine. I know that you're concerned with the effects of the next morning, right? I know you have a daughter who obviously you have a good relationship with. I know so much about you from that 30-second, 45-second story. We've now made a connection. You've been vulnerable with me because you made a mistake. You're not superhuman, and you make mistakes as silly as it could be, is eye drops, thinking it was wine drops, which I've actually never heard of. So I've learned something. But you see the connection that's already being made. So if you tell just a random work story, and now don't get me wrong, I have all kinds of work stories I tell, right? All kinds of them, from stories from around the globe when I'm trying to make points or I'm trying to explain things. I give a lot of presentations and stuff like this. So when I'm explaining those things, I use these work stories because it really cements the principles or the ideas or the points that I'm trying to make. But when you're trying to connect with your team and discuss these values and those really touchy-feely subjects, showing your authenticity as a leader is huge, and a story like that is fantastic.
And Scott, you've picked up on one of almost the added benefits of sharing personal stories. So, for example, every time you share a personal story, so like the wine drops one, I'm doing it to get the message across. That's what I'm doing it for, to get the message across of assumptions. And then I could also use work-related ones where we were working on this project and we made an assumption and the customer was happy. So we'll do all that. But the personal ones, getting people really engaged, but you've touched on the added benefit. What it means now is a little bit more about me than that would never have come up in conversation. And by default, that means we have a little bit of a closer relationship than we would have. And we might do this again in a year's time, and you're probably going, so how's your daughter? Drinking red wine. And it does show that little things that I like red wine. I'm sitting at home on a Friday night drinking a red wine with my daughter. So yeah, maybe we've got a good relationship. And so you pick up all these little extra things. I'm not sharing the story to get that across, but that's the added benefits. And when you're talking about leadership, could you imagine every time you share a personal story, you're getting the message across, but every time you share a personal story, you're strengthening the relationship with your team? My goodness, how powerful is that?
Absolutely. However, I will clarify, I'm more likely to ask you if you started drinking Melbeck instead of asking how your daughter is. That may upset you and my wife just a little bit. All right. This has been a fantastic conversation. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I knew it was going to be a good one from the get-go, but unfortunately, all good things, like all good stories, got to
nowhere to end them.
No one to end them. And we're going to wrap up right now. But the ending, this story will have the similar ending to all the podcasts here, with a couple last questions. The first being question I asked all the guests here at the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast. And that's according to you, Raoul Dolan, what makes a great leader?
I think authenticity. And we talked about showing a little bit of vulnerability. You don't have to be superhuman. I know you like your little sayings. One of my sayings is, real leaders aren't perfect and perfect leaders aren't real. So stop trying to be perfect and start trying to be real.
Oh, I'm stealing that one.
You can steal that one. I'll swap you that one.
We'll swap.
I'll swap.
You take use and don't abuse, and I'll take
real leaders aren't perfect. Perfect leaders aren't real. Perfect. You can take that one.
Aren't real. Awesome. That is, wow. I feel like if this microphone wasn't so expensive, I'd drop it. Final thing is, how can people find you? How can they follow you? Be part of your journey? I'll let you, shameless plugs, have at it.
Yeah, look, LinkedIn, I'm on LinkedIn, but GabrielleDolan.com is my website. And I think if you're thinking about, this sounds interesting, how do I get started? Go to the website. You can download my 7-day storytelling starter kit. It's free, and it is sort of what it says it is. It's going to be something just to help you get started and help think about the stories that you could use. So it's a good place to start.
Awesome. And as always, it's easy for you to listeners in the show notes. Head to movingforwardleadership.com/184. You want to grab a copy of the book, then go ahead and do that through the show notes, and you get to support me as well, because yes, that is affiliate link, and helps, one, support Raoul and her cause, but two, helps me keep this podcast going. So Ma'am, it has been fantastic. Love the conversation, love the banter and the stories that were told. But more importantly, you know what? Seeing the importance of them and what makes a great story.
Thanks, Scott. I think it sounds like I've converted you to story time.
We'll see. We'll see. I'll let you know.
One story at a time.
And that's a wrap for this episode, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast. But you know what you could do to truly support the podcast? And no, that's not leaving a rating and review. It's simply helping a friend. And that is helping a friend by sharing this episode with them if you think this would resonate with them and help them elevate their performance level, whether that's within themselves, their teams, or their organization. So do that, help me, help a friend, win-win all around, and hey, you look like a great friend at the same time. So just hit that little share button on your app, and then feel free to fire this episode to anyone that you feel would benefit from it. Finally, there's always more. There's always more lessons around being the highest performing leader that you can possibly be, whether that's for yourself, your team, or your organization. So why don't you subscribe? Subscribe to the show via movingforwardleadership.com/subscribe. And until next time, lead, don't boss, and thanks for coming out. Take care now.